those who search for a solution are going to have to find a formula for sharing this very holy and very cursed city in ways which give real empowerment and the full exercise of political rights to everyone who lives there, or who look at Jerusalem as their political capital, without infringing on the rights of others. Similarly, this formula will have to give all believers in the face of the Abrahamic tradition a sense that they are free to worship without coercion and are not doing so on sufferance. Now, this is a tall order. It's not going to be easy to do this, but I would argue that it is not impossible. It could be argued that this can be done without redividing Jerusalem. But if we do, though, if we want to avoid that, we have to take into account the fact that all the windy rhetoric about reunification notwithstanding, this is a city which includes two national communities, as Rabbi Hertzberg said, and that they've been in conflict with one another for the better part of 5 generations, and therefore they live in complete segregation. What is crucial, I would argue, and it's particularly important to say this in the United States, is that the veil of cant and deceit which envelops discussion of this question be lifted. The fact is that asserting the primacy, the exclusive primacy of one religious tradition, in effect demeans and insults the other. The fact is that asserting the absolute primacy of one nationality, in practice, means the subjugation of the other. Now, this is not to say that believing Jews or Christians or Muslims should not regard their affiliation with Jerusalem as special, unique, and distinct. Each group will naturally and necessarily do so. It is rather the assertion that their affiliation gives them the right to primacy in the here and now, in the political here and now, which is so very dangerous. Similarly, I would argue that no one could expect either Palestinians or Israelis to cease to regard Jerusalem as the supreme focus of their national aspirations. They're going to continue to do so whatever we say here in Washington. Rather, these aspirations must be realized in such a way that their realization does not prevent the realization of the legitimate aspirations of others. Now, like religion, nationalism can be an uncompromising and elemental force, and it's often unamenable to rational argument. I would say that those of us who seek an acceptable resolution of this conflict have to resist these uncompromising and elemental tendencies, have to challenge the exclusivist political claims which they engender. On one side, this means resisting the new exclusivism regarding Jerusalem, which is associated with some voices in the Islamic, Arab, and Palestinian communities. On the other side, what it means is much more difficult, because it involves a willingness to stand up to an apparent consensus calling for exclusive Israeli control of Jerusalem, which in fact is not as monolithic as it may seem, but which is intimidating, which is even terrifying to some who would divide, whether they are on the Hill, in Congress, or whether they are in the Christian and Jewish communities in this country. I would argue that the only reason that partisans of this exclusivist approach to Jerusalem can claim that they represent a consensus is that the issue has not been openly debated. We heard Ambassador Mertv say, we were instructed not to say anything about Jerusalem. Well, everybody's been instructed not to talk about Jerusalem, in fact. We're not supposed to talk about it. It's deferred. Leave it alone. And in fact, that is the situation of Jerusalem today. It has to be debated, I would argue. And I think it's welcome progress that an event such as this is taking place today. If the issues involved in this dispute are dispassionately laid before most people, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, Israelis, I would argue it might be easier than many expect to arrive at a consensus for a shared rather than an exclusivist solution. I would say that it's imperative that we arrive at such a consensus, because an exclusivist solution at bottom is based on the bad. At bottom is nothing more than the barbaric argument that might think's right, and it cannot be a basis for peace in this region. Now, there may be the possibility that I am being wildly naive in saying all of this. It may be that mankind, it may be that we haven't progressed since the days of the Jebusites and the Canaanites and their successors. It may be that mankind, and the specific elements of mankind we're talking about out there, mankind has not yet reached a stage where the idea of sharing can prevail. If that's the case, then there's very little any of us can do. We should follow our religious leaders in praying that the suffering that's going to inevitably ensue can somehow be limited. I personally prefer to take a more optimistic view. I personally prefer to believe that we have progressed past the era of the caveman. I personally prefer to believe that we've progressed past the era of our warlike ancestors and others who fought over Jerusalem for many centuries. If I'm right, if a compromise solution is possible, I would argue that it will be one which, while it respects the three different religious traditions which give Jerusalem its sanctity and the two national claims which today envelop it, will privilege none of these traditions, neither of these claims, but will rather enable all to share jointly in the wonders of a very beautiful, very magnificent, very holy, and very cursed city, Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Filled with passion within the time limits, and if those seated here in front do not need a cup of coffee, they have not been listening. So you're excused. Please back in your seats at 11 o'clock. One question. Thank you.
I love Dick Mertv very much, but I'd like to correct him. I'd like to take the word rebuttal out of the conversation. Because if we are conducting a rebuttal, we're conducting adversary proceedings. And even though I know, I've been on enough platforms to know that you are, in your majority of this room, more responsive to Father Atik's and Rashid's rhetoric than even to mine, because you suspect that underneath it there lurks, and indeed there does, a terrible Zionist nationalist simply put on sheep's clothing. Let us try not to rebut, but look together for the truth.
I now ask Arthur Hertzberg to make his 4-minute presentation.
I don't care if it's free. I'm going to make my points machine gun fast. My first problem for further clarification is indeed with something that keeps ran through the remarks of all three of my colleagues, which is we talk about fairness, justice, historical truth, and I ask, whose narrative is being told? For instance, Father Atik made a great point of talking about the right-wing religious Zionists and their pushing Israel towards exclusivist claims. I have written many articles, some of them you have read, in the New York Review of Books through the years, beating up on them. Nonetheless, is that the only narrative? Is there not the narrative of Muslim fundamentalism? Is there not also the narrative of Hamas? Father Atik makes a point of hankering for a mosaic which supposedly once existed. Well, I've been around Israel since 1949, on and off. I remember what didn't exist. As a matter of fact, when the 67 war was over for the first time in many centuries of history, Jews were permitted beyond the seventh step up to the Mosque of Hebron. And the crazies, the 400 of them, who are now in Hebron, represent the cutting edge of a different narrative. It took a military conquest to create the complications, and they are complications, of the Mosque in Hebron, which is open to both of the major faiths, which have a share in it. And lest you think that I'm being the secularist while everybody else quotes the Bible, you will remember that when Abraham died, the Hebrew Bible says, "Vayikberu oto Yitzchak v'Yishmael banav," and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him. They joined and buried him. Where? In the mosque. Now, from 49 to 67, was there a mosaic in Jerusalem? I couldn't get inside. Every time not even with an American passport, I stood on the roof of our mission on Friday night and tried to catch a glimpse at the right angle of a stone or two of the Western Wall. If we're going to have a mosaic in Jerusalem, I could keep going. If we're going to have a mosaic in Jerusalem, we had better have one that has not yet ever existed. The closest thing to a religious mosaic in Jerusalem right now is under the rule of the Israelis. I was in Jerusalem right after the Six-Day War when Moshe Dayan ordered the removal of the Israeli flag from the top of the Mosque of Omar. I was there. I was standing about 6 people over from him when he heard that it had been done and said, under no circumstances, the mosque belongs to the Waqf, and we're not going to do this. And as you know, that was the end of it. So that when we tell narratives, let us at least realize that there are other narratives. There are other narratives. Now, I have one other problem with this whole dream that Rashid expressed so eloquently of shared sovereignty. It's become a kind of buzzword all of a sudden. The trouble with it for me is shared sovereignty has to deal with such things, shared sovereignty in Jerusalem, as who's going to run the garbage collection, under what law will police operate, and there are various systems of law, who is going to guard what happens when an incident happens, as in that nasty and unforgivable tunnel that was opened a while ago, and the shooting is not random, it's 2 armed military formations shooting at each other. Let me, in the interest of time, and I said I was going to be very brief, I want everybody in this room to search his or her soul and ask himself the question. Him is now not gender reference. God forbid that I should get into such trouble. Ask yourself the very simple question. There's a new phenomenon in the world called, and I'll say it in its most provocative word, Jewish power. For the first time in 2,000 years, there's a Jewish army, there's a Jewish state, there is Jewish political state power. I have a feeling that we have been very comfortable, or have made ourselves comfortable, we in the world, with Muslim keepers of the shrines, of the holy places, Turkish keepers, British keepers, but Jewish power somehow or other evokes at very deep recesses of our souls some uncomfortable feelings. Some uncomfortable feelings. The notion that it be Jewish policemen, or yes, a Jewish army, to be in physical control of at least West Jerusalem and exercise all the necessary policing functions over the holy city, with every guarantee that all of this bloody encroachment by Jews, bloody encroachment into parts of the holy city where they should not be, the buying up of houses in Arab Jerusalem, with every guarantee worked out in an arrangement. But somehow or other, ask yourself the question whether you wouldn't be, some of you, a little happier with Russians, Belgians, Chechens, and God knows what policing Jerusalem, provided it didn't announce that the Jews are back on the stage of history. And Zionism is the announcement that the Jews are back on the stage of history. After that is announced, I am one of the people, as you know, from what I have said and what I have written, through many years, I am one of the people who believes that every quality, every right, every decency needs to be extended. But I do not apologize for the reappearance of Jews in history. I do not apologize for the proposition that it may be the Jewish turn to show how, in civil and political terms, the holiness of the city is safeguarded for everyone. Thank you very much.
I would like to begin by making an announcement. Those of you who are interested in Palestinian liberation theology, there are some material there of Sabil, which is our center in Jerusalem. And if those of you who would like to pick up one of the copies outside or leave your name and address, we would love to be in touch with each other. I believe it is of utmost importance to have a commitment to truth in everything that we do. And within the conflict, I think truth has been wounded and injured most of the time. Because you see, as already expressed, who's interpreting history? From which source are you getting your statistics? There are Jewish sources that tell you that Jerusalem had a majority of Jews most of the time. You look at other sources, they will tell you between almost the 2nd or 3rd or 4th century to the 19th century, the number of Jews that were in Jerusalem did not number more than 500 people. And that the only time that the number of Jews exceeded the number of the Christians, not to mention about the Muslims who were always the majority, was not except in the 15, 17, before the 1920s, or a little bit after the 1920s. Yeah, I don't remember all those figures. Where do you get your source? That's why, when I'm trying to approach this whole question of Jerusalem, I'm trying to emphasize that it's futile to just keep hammering on the past. I mean, if one wants to begin to talk about the past, again, there are different ways of looking at it. For the last 2,000 years of our history, how many years did Jews control Palestine? Less than 50 years. And then for 2,000 years, then you deny the 2,000 years of other people's control of Palestine? And then you begin to talk about before 2,000 years? Ask yourself also. You eliminate 2,000 years of history. And give a priority or greater claim, greater sovereignty. It's just like as if, I'm trying to think of an example, and I'm not a historian, and maybe the historians can find one. It's like, going to Egypt now, and trying to really locate the ancient pharaohs, and to kick all the Muslims out of Egypt today, because the ancient pharaohs have a greater and a prior claim, because they date their history long before the Muslims came to Egypt. This is the way I am receiving this message. I don't think it's going to help us. In fact, I would like to challenge Dr. Pipes. I believe, with all due respect, I don't think he really, I know that maybe I shouldn't say this, but from my perspective, I don't think he really cares about the Jewish community in Palestine and its survival. Because I don't think it will survive on injustice. And he never mentioned justice. He never mentioned justice. It's all history. History is not going to solve our problem. As to the access to the holy places and trying to really, talk about how admirable Israel was, ask me. I live in Jerusalem. I have parishioners in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has a free access to those of you Americans who go there, not to the Palestinians. Some of my parishioners cannot come to Jerusalem to worship. They cannot come. I have written dozens of letters to the military government just to give them a permit to come into Jerusalem to worship. And we talk about freedom of worship. And they've never been permitted to come. And I, many times, sneak in my parishioners to Jerusalem to come to church. It's illegal. I would say we need a commitment to truth. And I accept that there are so many different narratives. I did not want to even talk about the Christian claim in Jerusalem. I'm sure Christians can stand here and make a very good case. Some Christians would even think that they have even a better case than Jews or Muslims. I don't want to enter into that because that is not going to help us. I will accept equal claims. Equal claims. And I want every one of those religions, of those peoples, to be there so that the mosaic of Jerusalem is complete. As to the presence of, that the mosaic has only emerged under Israeli rule, the problem you see with the establishment of the State of Israel, it did not come in a way to live with, in a peaceful way to live and exist with the other. It came as a dominating power. And that's why Jewish power today is being rejected. Not because they are Jews. And I do not like the implication that, we are against it because it is somehow Jewish power. No. Thank God for Jewish presence. But when Jews want to dominate others, that is unacceptable in today's world. And I believe personally that the 21st century will not tolerate it. We're coming to the end of this century, and the paradigm that we have suffered under is a dominator paradigm. And that needs to shift. We are talking today, when we talk about the future of Jerusalem, we are talking about a paradigm shift from domination to partnership. And this is what needs to happen in Jerusalem. Partnership, equal partnership. And if we really love the Jewish people and are concerned about their future, as well as the future of the Muslims and as well as the future of the Christians, believe me, there is no other way but sharing Jerusalem in partnership with each other. Thank you.
I think there's some misunderstanding about the term exclusive and the implications of that. What I'm arguing for is Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, undivided capital of Israel. I'm not arguing for exclusive Jewish presence in Jerusalem or Jewish control of all holy sites. By no means. There's no exclusivity here. I think the point that must be made is that politically there can only be one sovereign power in Jerusalem. And you can take your choice. It can be a Palestinian sovereign power, it can be an Israeli one. I don't know of any other realistic alternatives, but that's it. And then the question is, within that regimen, what is it going to look like? And I think we all agree there has to be freedom of access and freedom of worship, and all that is implied in those freedoms. But no one is talking about, certainly I'm not talking about exclusive presence. And I think that's an important point to reiterate. Father Atik mentioned, brought up the analogy of going to Egypt and throwing the Muslims out in favor of some kind of pharaonic power. No one's talking about throwing the Muslims out. That's not the issue.